Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Milton Board of Appeals. This is on the application of the residences at East Milton. This is the June 3rd, 2021 meeting. My name is John Leonard. I'm chairman of the Board of Appeals. Just bear with me 1 second while I clear up my screen. The purpose of the hearing this evening is to have the peer review of Clifford Bomer of Davis Square Architects of Somerville, Massachusetts. Mr. Bomer is a member of the, he's an AIA architect, and he has testified on several cases as a peer reviewer on behalf of the town. With me this evening are board members Nick Gray and board member Jeff Mullen. So if is Mr. Bomer here, Bev?
Yes. I'm here.
Oh, great. That's great, Cliff. Excuse me. I have limited capacity, I guess, on my screen, so I don't. There you are.
I'm here.
How are you tonight?
I'm good, thank you.
If at any time during the proceeding you need to take a break or take a deep breath or two, just let us know, and we'd be delighted to do that. So
I appreciate that.
I think without further ado, Mr. Bomer, why don't we give you the floor? And I just should indicate for the record that Mr. Bomer has filed a architectural peer review. It's dated 2001. It's on file with the board website and has been since that date. So we look forward to hearing from you.
Terrific.
Just let me, Cliff, give me 1 second. I may have said March 30, but it's May 30th, in case there's any people out there who are aghast at so welcome to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you. Indeed, it is May 30th, not that many days ago, and I hope that everyone's had time to crawl through the report. It is rather dense, but as I usually do, I think I'd like to just start with overall impressions. I haven't spent much time at all thinking about whether unit plans are perfectly laid out or whether that's a kitchen I designed or anything of that sort. It's really been, a higher level view of how this development will really enhance the town of Milton and will work well within itself for the developer and the residents of the development. So in that sense, I'm totally happy to talk about any of the many details that I do bring up in that letter. But I'll start with just the overall view and happy to field as many questions as you may have. I think overall, I hope I made it clear in the report that I think it's a wholly appropriate site for this type of development. It's interesting topography, and I think the plans for the building do take advantage of the existing grades of the roadways. It's a site that I would call transitional in the sense that it's already largely used for commercial use, and it is a bridge kind of site between commercial uses and much smaller scale residential uses, 1 and 2 family homes. And I think I actually did not have access to the original proposal, and I understand that Mass Housing did review it and asked for some modifications to be made. I'm guessing that the modifications were largely about the cutting back on the height of the building on the Bassett Street side of the development. And I will say that I look at a lot of 40B developments, and it's very clear that this developer has made significant gestures towards recognizing the scale of the adjacent residential neighborhood and making some significant modifications or signals in their massing for the building massing to recognize that. So I think that's all good. I think from my perspective, and I think it's very typical at this state of development of a project that we all should be really focusing on site issues. I think this notion is supported by the civil engineering review because you really want to make sure that the scale of the development that you're proposing, is well coordinated with what you're actually trying to achieve on that site, and of course that it fits in well so that in the long term it's really well integrated into the community. So from that kind of perspective, I view this plan as schematic, and I think the developer would acknowledge that. But my review is kind of in this direction. I see lots of what I would call placeholders in the design. I think it's very clear all of the elements that the developer would like to integrate into this project to make it work, from a functional and amenity, and to really be a development that will attract residents and keep residents. But I think kind of the gist of my report is, while it's clear all of the elements that would like to be in this development, everything really hasn't found its right place necessarily, or even its right size. And again, it's normal. I think that's a good place to be. A good place to start is get everything out on the table that you want to make sure it needs to be integrated into the development, and have a strong idea about how it will at the same time still fit in the neighborhood. I think you can check all of those boxes that it's moving in that direction. So in my report, I point out a number of what I consider to be parts that really aren't working, and I think should be looked at again. Probably, and some of these are supported by traffic and civil as well. I think probably the one that is the clearest is that intersection of Bassett Street and Franklin Street, that drop-off zone. The traffic engineer believes it should be totally eliminated. Civil doesn't quite go that far. My position on that is it functionally certainly does not appear to be working for all of the elements that are located in that little corner. I think it's a great idea to have a drop-off spot there, but I think it's not really working right now. There isn't enough space to accommodate everything that this building needs, or certainly that the developer would like to incorporate at that corner. So to me, that I think it from both the traffic and civil perspective, it's not working, and from my perspective, it's similar feeling that there just isn't enough space as currently designed to fit all of those functional elements there. My second kind of big picture view is, I'm not a traffic person. I'm not somebody who calculates parking ratios, but in my opinion, the same argument can be made for the courtyard space. There are a number of, I think, perfectly good ideas for amenities that are typical for this type of development, and perhaps even the target population, but there really isn't enough space there to make them work. Between the dog relief area and play equipment that I couldn't tell if that was for children or for dogs. The civil engineer seemed to think it was for dogs. I thought it was for children. The bocce court, that's along Adams Court that, this sounds silly to say it, but it seems like it could literally be dangerous at being that close to uh, a pedestrian path. That is just terrific. I think the idea of improving that path is wonderful. It's a nice public amenity to add. Uh, there's seating in there, some landscaping. There's just a lot going on in that courtyard. I'm not the designer of the development, but in my opinion, I think probably uh, reducing the number of parking spaces in there. I think the idea of having a courtyard is a nice idea. I think, though, that I would seriously look at kind of working at it from the other direction, design the amenities in a way that really work. And I'm guessing that the only space that will be left will be a kind of drop-off area for residents of the building, or potentially picking up, Uber pickup of people who live in the building and really don't provide parking there, but provide really nice amenities. So that's, again, I'm just looking at the kind of big picture. I think it's the same problem, trying to fit too many things into something that I think could be a very pleasant space, but to me, it doesn't actually work at kind of a basic functional level. The last comments I made on the kind of big picture is, I think that there were some suggestions by some reviewers that this is a good site to consider mixed use building. I don't disagree with that. To me, it's not a critical element, but I would say that I think there are opportunities for mixed use. I thought potentially along Franklin Street, that wing, because of some kind of awkward conditions, the setback is minimal there, which isn't atypical for commercial use, but I think for the residential use, it's not working very well with that minimal setback along Franklin Street. Similarly, I think you have to look, I think the idea of the 3-bedroom units that are on Bassett Street with their own individual entries, I think that it's kind of a nice idea, particularly for larger units where you might expect more children. You want to minimize use of elevators, et cetera. Having their own individual entries is kind of a nice idea, but I don't think there's really enough space there as currently designed, not enough setback, or the vegetative buffer does not seem realistic to me, given that there would be 3 bedrooms and a living room all facing the sidewalk, and at grade sidewalk, not very far away. So ultimately, where I landed on giving giving the designers more space to work with would be potentially shortening that wing of the building along Bassett Street and moving the entire composition towards the west, to give space both along Franklin Street, potentially pull it back on Bassett Street, or, as the civil engineer I think believes, reprogram that space on Bassett Street as commercial space. But in any case, it all kind of comes back to the same thing. Is I see the program as currently depicted on the drawings as a lot of placeholders without resolution. I think it's everything that the intent that I see, I think, is completely appropriate, and I think it's a great spot for it. That's why it's appropriate, in my opinion. But I think it needs another round of really ensuring that some of the very specific ideas of program that wants to be incorporated into this, and then really showing that it works in the site plan, would be the next step, in my opinion. There are lots of other details that you probably don't want me to go into, but overall, I think it's a great place for development of this site. I do want to mention one other thing though, and I think it actually kind of points out this notion of things not being quite in the right place. So while I'm talking about being squeezed in the dog relief area, the bocce court, passive recreation within the courtyard, the drop-off space at the corner of of Franklin and Bassett, a number of things just aren't working because of size. Not maybe they could be worked out where they are, but at the same time, then on the I think it's fourth floor of the building, on the north side of the building, where it was cut drastically back, 2 stories of the building were reduced from a double loaded corridor configuration. I'm imagining that's what happened, from cut back from double loaded to single loaded, creating over 5,000 square feet of potentially programmable outdoor space, and which is significantly larger than all of the other amenity space added together. So it just brings me back again. There's tremendous potential in that kind of space that is outdoor, potentially outdoor usable space, and yet we're feeling very squeezed in other areas of the project where there are very specific ideas about what to do, but in my opinion, not large enough or maybe not in the right place. So that's kind of where I'm at on this. Again, I'm very supportive of the idea. I think there has been a significant mitigation strategy employed at the north side of the building. But in my opinion, it needs another round of thinking at the kind of site planning and site programming, outdoor usable space programming level, ensuring that the basic functionality is really there. And if you have units at grade, make sure that they're working properly at grade. All you have to do is look across the street and see how most of the single family homes have been developed. As I noted in the analysis of the existing neighborhood, virtually all of the single family homes have dealt with the issue of maintaining adequate level of privacy, screening, and this building's not quite there, certainly on the Bassett Street side, and at least the first half of the walk along the building on the Franklin Street side. So
That's very, very helpful, Mr. Bowman. Let me just ask you 2 questions that I know are going to come up, so maybe you can address them. The first one is, I know, near and dear to Bob Galvin's heart, dealing with representing the neighborhood association, and that's lighting from the building having an adverse effect on the neighborhood. Are you able to comment at this time on the lighting as it's proposed?
Well, I think that's a good point. I mean, I think as far as the lighting along walkways and certainly within the courtyards, probably a non-issue for the neighborhood. I think most of the kind of typical lighting for lighting pedestrian access to the building, that can be managed reasonably well. The notion of the neighborhood being subjected to lighting from within units and seeing a lot of lighting that they're not used to, that connects back to the screening, to the setback notion that as currently designed, I don't think it's really possible to have that kind of mitigation of that impact. And to achieve that, I think you really would need some more space on both the Bassett Street side and the Franklin Street, at least at the northern end of Franklin Street. So again, I think kind of typical lighting for circulation around the building is probably easy to manage. Certainly managing lighting to maintain dark sky is achievable, but as currently designed, it is lacking the ability to really provide enough landscape buffering on the north and east sides of the building, in my opinion.
And just one other issue that I noted in your letter, you indicated, and I don't know the exact amount, but let's say 3 to 5 residences that are proximate to the subject development would be most affected.
Yeah.
And you briefly discussed mitigation for those particular houses. Do you want to discuss that in any more detail in case one of those homeowners happens to be present out there?
I think, again, I think it's back to the setback issue. It's a transitional site, and we deal with this a lot in transitional sites, that there are mechanisms commonly employed in smaller scale residential that really work. People are used to it. It's typically some, relatively significant setback that allows some landscaping, at least, even if the landscaping is only providing foreground to kind of create scale, so that the this is 4 stories along Bassett Street, so that the scale isn't quite as abrupt as it could be. So from my opinion, I think that as I said, the cutting back on those upper 2 floors on the north side does a pretty good job of mitigating shadow impact, although there isn't a shadow study, and that's another big point in my letter, is more documentation is required to really, for everybody to be on the same page about being able to analyze the impact of the building. But my opinion is, I do think some foreground elements, some some landscape elements. It will never be anything other than a 4-story building, that's for sure. But I think an effective method for tying it in to the landscape, and I think it's even mentioned in the mass housing letter. They talk about, I forget exactly their term, but it is about fitting it into the neighborhood. You need some more space to work with to do that.
And one final question, Mr. Bowman, you mentioned in your report the possible need for a construction management plan.
Absolutely.
You want to briefly address what that is and why it's necessary in this project?
Sure. And this was brought up in the civil engineering plan, that it's pretty obvious that this site is 100% developed. And so on the perimeter, the 3 between the Adams Court and the other 2 streets, it's 100% developed. And to the south side, there are significant site modifications proposed. There's a parking garage proposed there. So while that's not superstructure much impact on that side because of the courtyard, there's a lot of subgrade work that's happening there. So the construction management plan for there are 2 important aspects. One is, and I think from the zoning board's perspective is the most important, is that the zoning board wants to be sure that what they're looking at is what they're going to get. So that if you approve X number of parking spaces, and then it turns out that because there haven't been adequate geotechnical borings or other issues that could come up, that the developer comes back to you after, later, and needs a modification because they can't build 14 parking spaces because of they hit ledge, and it's not economic to do that. So the half of the construction management plan is really the way that the developer assures to themselves that the kind of budget they're carrying and the basic feasibility issues are all working. That's one level, and that for most developers, that's really the one they need to solve first, because that's where all the dollars are, and just making sure that it's really buildable as proposed, and they don't have to come back to you and say, actually, we didn't really mean it about that number of parking spaces or whatever it might be. The other half, the construction management plan, that is of extreme importance to the neighborhood is how are you going to build this thing, even though you're taking up virtually the entire site, including constructing a parking garage. So from the neighborhood perspective, it's more about where are there cranes? How are materials going to be delivered? How often is the street shut down for making service cuts into the street? Is my water supply going to be interrupted? Is there going to be all kinds of debris?
I mean, can I just say something, Cliff? I think that we're getting really into the nitty gritty of things about construction components. I mean, right now we're trying to get to the point of the initial design of things, right? Everything that you're putting forward, I think that it is correct. There are many construction components that are true to what we need to deal with. And you're correct. There's a lot that needs to happen when you start doing construction. But at this early process, we're trying to just, try to mitigate really what the critical components are within the design pieces that we're proposing. And I think that you and I go back and forth, many times on these presentations. We know that we're going to need to deal with construction, and we try to find the best ways. But I think that I appreciate your input from a design perspective on this.
Yep.
Sure.
And to that point,
let me just weigh in on that. I'm not suggesting the parties here or Mr. Bomer and the architect for the project shouldn't be discussing this. I asked that question more for the benefit of the public at large, who may not be familiar with a construction development plan and what it's
John, of course, no, of course.
Yeah, and I think that's a fair point, which is I think that for the board in particular, it's the kind of first half of that, of making sure that what they're reviewing is actually buildable and feasible. And I think that the civil engineer review goes into greater detail than I just did. The second half, I think about, tire wash stations and frequency of trucks and deliveries and et cetera, that the building department will approve that. They will review it and they'll approve it. So I hear what you're saying. And I'll just bring up an example. I recently reviewed a project that actually did have exactly the problem that I stated. There was all kinds of angst about parking ratios, and it finally got approved. Everybody finally got on board with the parking ratio, and then they started construction and couldn't build the parking garage that they thought they were going to build, and it just reopened the whole thing in a way that wasn't pleasant for anybody. So those are those kinds of feasibility issues that I'm talking about that are most important.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Bowman. Let me ask my colleagues whether they have any questions. Mr. Gray, do you have any questions of Mr. Bowman?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Jeffrey Mellon, please.
Mr. Bowman, good to see you. When you say the project needs another round, what are you really telling the board? And when you answer that, what I'm really going for is, what would you recommend the next step to be?
Well, I mean, the board, again, and you know this, it needs to decide for themselves. But what I mean is that my analysis, again, I just want to repeat that I think all of the elements that I see proposed, and most of the ideas about how to do the massing, certainly the L-shaped building and a courtyard makes a ton of sense to me. There are other ways of doing it, but I agree with the overall approach. For me, what hasn't been resolved is taking each one of those elements and making sure it really works. And I think I know where that, at least if I were the designer, I think I know the direction I would take it. But I think if the board concurs, that there are issues with you know, location, scale of the elements of the building, setbacks. And I would particularly, again, focus you on the corner of Franklin and Bassett as a good place to start, because it's the footprint of the building that's really going to determine whether or not that idea of a drop-off at that point is working. So when I say it needs another round, I'm talking about a really site plan level of looking at it to make sure the setbacks are right, to ensure privacy of units and or mitigation of scale of the building for the neighbors, the proposed functional amenity elements, whether they're really working. The civil engineer had issues about you know, potential emergency vehicle access to the courtyard and there not being a sidewalk at that level, the driveway not being wide enough. I think there have been enough kind of, you know, I think really concrete suggestions or concerns expressed that if I were the developer, I would look at all those and see which ones really do enhance the design and make it something that works better for everybody.
Thank you. I'm wondering, would you recommend that the developer take these recommendations under advisement and resubmit the drawings with modifications to the extent that they agreed with these changes? Or do you think that one way to advance this might be through some type of working session?
Or both. Yeah, or both. I do think
Yeah, again, there's a sequencing issue there too, though.
Yeah.
I would support the working session. I'm just wondering, let me put a finer point on my comment. Some of your comments are high level and really sound in big issues that are going to fundamentally modify the design, notwithstanding the fact that in general you have a fair bit of support for it. That's my sense. But some of them are also finer details, and you know, the projects like this, as you know, are all about the details. And I guess I'm struggling with how to approach both of those in some type of systematic fashion without you know, going through multiple rounds of design review and getting people frustrated and things like that, and yet really trying to address the more detailed kinds of comments that I think could really make a difference. And I think that it came through in your letter, you know.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, I really want to emphasize that the kind of big moves, the really important moves, I think are sound.
Yeah.
I really believe that.
Yeah.
But I do think that it's really not working. And I can give you a couple simple examples, and I'm not sure what this means about the next steps, but I think the cutting away of those top two floors, that was done for very good reasons, but it also created a whole two stories of units, of single loaded units. And I think we all know that's not a very efficient way to design multifamily housing. And it resulted in, as I was pointing out earlier, over 5,000 square feet of roof space that isn't programmed at all. I mean, we know nothing about what's programmed for that space. So, you know, I would say that you could potentially achieve the same mitigation strategy and build a more efficient building if that setback were greater on Bassett Street. The impact, you know, solar impact is a question of two things. It's determined by setbacks from the neighbors, and it's determined by height of the building. And you can achieve the same mitigation with the same height or with a wider building, so to speak, if it's set back further. So, you know, my point is, I think that for the, if I were the developer, I would instruct my architect to go through this carefully and either convince myself that actually all these things really are working and here's why we think they're working, or take another pass uh, at refining the site plan in a way so that all those elements really are working. I think it could result in where I think this could end up uh, as a better project. It probably would have fewer parking spaces. That may not make everybody happy, but this is you know, for Milton, it's a pretty transit friendly site. The unit mix is, you know, largely not family units. It's by far studios and ones that I think uh, probably is a population that may not need cars as much. Another point I made in my report is there's very little space dedicated for bicycle parking. And again, depending where they go, there are some developments, they're largely small units that are attracting senior population. I don't have the sense that that's really the target population for this building.
Hey, Cliff, if I can, I'm sorry, and I am trying to make sure that I'm on, and I think that by turning off my video, I think it's making it better so that I can actually, my network is working better. I think that I usually have conflicts with this Zoom call, so I apologize for not being on, but I want you guys to hear me. I agree with a lot of the components that you're saying.
Sorry, Mr. Valdez? Mr.
Yes.
Valdez, I'm sorry, this isn't your time to be cross-examining Mr. Bowman.
Okay, I'm sorry. That's fine.
We should wait your turn. I've added
That's fine.
you to the list and we'll give you.
No problem. No problem. No problem.
Mr. Mullen has the floor. Jeffrey, let me ask Mr. Bowman, have you finished your answer to Mr. Mullen's question?
Well, I hope it wasn't too meandering, but in my opinion, I think the developer should, to make it succinct, should come back with revisions in the site planning to address issue, not just my issues, but also the civil and traffic engineers. I would take all three of those documents and come back with some new sketches, just sketch level even.
Jeff, do you have any further questions of Mr. Bowman?
I do just, you know, I am going to, I'm going to want to advocate for a working session at the appropriate point. What I was really probing about is when, and it feels to me like we need a little bit more information on some of the bigger issues before we get to that level. That's what I get from Mr. Bowman's testimony and, you know, and that was really what I was going for. But to me, this project is, a lot of this project is about the finer details and about the human scale of the streetscape that are going to make or break this, particularly with respect to some of the comments we've heard from the neighbors most impacted. That's my sense. I know that's not a question.
We agree. No, I completely agree. I think that's a really good way of putting it, that, and it's normal in a design process. You focus on certain things and that's just where your mind works and you end up with something. But you're absolutely right. I think it is the streetscape that would be the next pass through to make that really work. Yeah, I totally agree.
I'm all set, John.
Okay, thank you very much. Attorney Peter Freeman, do you have any questions?
Thank you for recognizing me, because I have been thinking, and at the risk of thinking out loud, I welcome those comments. I know my client does, including Mr. Mullen's suggestion slash question. I was thinking about a workshop format at some point. I think that does make sense on the projects I've worked on where there are questions like this, where not to be presumptuous, but it seems agreed by all parties that it's an appropriate site for development like this. But, you know, the devil is in the details, and all the very articulate things that Mr. Bomer has said, which he has done on all projects I've been involved with.
Yep.
So, I think kind of process-wise, and ultimately, I don't know what the timing would be for the next hearing, but I think the first step logically is that Frank Valdez, our architect, and Cliff should talk offline, really, maybe, the letter was a few days ago, perfectly timely, but, Frank and our team actually, need to talk a little bit after tonight, and then, probably have Frank have a one-on-one with Mr. Bomer. And then I don't know if we'd be ready to do some redesign and whether that should be followed by another ZBA meeting and then a workshop or vice versa. So that's where I am thinking out loud, as you can tell. And through the chairman, if you allow feedback from Jen Corcoran or Frank Valdez, it might be useful for us to, again, move the process. I think everybody agrees that this is something along these lines is what we should do. So if it's up to you, if you want to recognize Jen or Frank, if they want to say something.
I will in a few minutes if I can. I just
Sure.
want to note, Peter, that the next hearing that I have is June 17th, and it indicated it's the applicant's response to peer reviews. So if that, I don't know whether that's helpful or.
That is helpful. And actually, Jen and I discussed that and I had forgotten. So yeah, we certainly want to hold that, and that being only about 2 weeks or exactly 2 weeks, that may not be enough time to have, substantial response to the architecture peer review, but certainly there are things on the stormwater and traffic, that absolutely we could devote probably a fairly lengthy time at that next hearing. So I thank you very much for reminding all of us, and that does relate to the timing that we're talking about on the design aspects.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Freeman. In terms of proceedings here, I'm going to ask Attorney Bob Galvin next, if he has any questions of Mr. Bomer, and then we'll proceed to Mr. Valdez, and we'll save Jen Corcoran for cleanup, if that's acceptable to everybody. So, Attorney Galvin, do you have any questions of Mr. Bomer or otherwise wish to be heard?
I guess my question, it might be through you, Mr. Chairman, to the applicant. Is there an intention to submit a lighting plan? It was something that Mr. Bomer indicated was deficient, and I certainly agree with his observation that it's not the lighting fixtures that would be along the walkways and things like that, because those can also always be adjusted in terms of their height and their design to, keep the lighting on site. But it's the building lighting at the upper elevations above the landscape buffer, which, we've always said was a little bit light from our perspective on this site, that we would be concerned with, because particularly the 5 or 6 residents that directly abut this project, when you look over at that site now, you're looking at 3 multifamily homes, but those actually do provide the transitional buffer to the commercial uses that are behind them. And when you make a 4 to 6 story building there, it's going to look radically different. So we certainly would love to see what the lighting ideas are. So I guess that's kind of a comment to find out whether there will be that level of detail given to us, because I think it's important.
Let's ask Mr. Bomer to comment on that, and then we'll come back to you, Mr. Galvin, and you can either refine that question or ask a new question. Mr. Bomer, do you want to address Bob Galvin's concern about?
He's completely right. I mean, the lighting plan is basic stuff along with detailed landscaping plans. I totally concur, and I do think that where the deficiencies are right now are in there being very limited space for really landscape buffering. And it was interesting, Attorney Galvin mentioned that those existing buildings do provide kind of buffer. And that's kind of what I was talking about having smaller scale foreground that really helps mitigate the scale of the building, which can be done with landscaping materials. It doesn't have to be a building.
Mr. Galvin, do you have any further questions or comments?
I just maybe a comment. Peter Freeman was kind enough to reach out to me earlier this week and solicited kind of our collective comments from the neighborhood association, and the neighborhood association and I met yesterday morning via Zoom to try to kind of collectively create a response. And I didn't get my response to Mr. Freeman until later in the day yesterday, but um, you know, I think we see some of the same things. We see a project that looks like it's going to require some revisions because of stormwater. We see a project that has some significant traffic issues. And to us, that means that it looks like there's at least a prospect that the developer might consider reducing the density of the project or the scale of the project. And if that's going to happen, there'll be some architectural changes too. And that would, and so I noted to Peter basically that we thought that what we have right now was a conceptual idea. We're not opposed to a density development that's significantly greater than what the bylaws allow. But we are certainly opposing what we have here now because it's so preliminary and it looks like it's going to change to us. So I guess that's my comment. On the amenity deck, that continues to be a significant source of concern for us because of the noise and the lighting, and just because it hovers over that residential end of this project. And I think despite the very best of intentions, it's going to be very tough to tell a group of well-meaning people that they can't hang out on a beautiful spring night out on that amenity deck to whatever hours. And even if they have a concierge there, I'm sorry, one concierge isn't going to be able to get 25 people back inside and their guests. So that is a concern of ours as well.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Galvin. Mr. Valdez. We're gonna turn it over to you if you have any.
Thank you. No, thank you.
Yeah, welcome to the board.
Ian,
No,
thank you. And I apologize for intervening in the middle of it.
we appreciate your enthusiasm. Why don't you
No.
to make any situation?
Look, I serve in the Urban Design Committee for the city of Somerville. And I am, can everybody hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay. All right. So I serve in the design, Urban Design Commission for the city of Somerville. I'm very aware of a lot of these issues. I deal with these as I review projects all the time. I am conscious of the impact of buildings within the urban realm. It's one of the key things that I'm involved in my own city. And, I appreciate all of the comments from Cliff. One comment that I would say is to Mr. Galvin, is that we haven't programmed that deck, and I think that that's completely open right now. We set back the building, and we ended up with a residual space that we don't know what we're going to do with it. I think that what we like to do is perhaps have it as a, as one of the things that Cliff said in his comment is perhaps it's just a green, space that is just part of just a tranquil space that is not habitable, that is just a component of a sustainable piece of the building. And one of the things that we wanted to do as we keep moving forward, we have to keep remembering that we're in schematic design. We haven't really solved a lot of these issues. We want to solve a lot of these issues as the team and with the comments, and that's part of what it is. So the deck, as an example, is something that we haven't programmed in. It might not be a habitable space. In the end, it might just be a green space that just is a sustainable component of the building. And that's one of the things that we continue to work on. To Peter Freeman's suggestion, I would love to perhaps have an offline conversation with Cliff. And I'm in Somerville, and I know that they're down in Davis Square. Yeah, I can go down there and pretty fast, 3 blocks away from my house. And I could have a conversation and go through a lot of these components and have a face-on conversation about our approach, what we're doing. And I am happy to do that. So we don't need to take the board's time to go, piece by piece of all these things. I think that there were many good points that Cliff brought up and on the drawings that I think that either were amiss from our perspective or that we need to address. But again, I want to emphasize that we're in schematic design. And as we all know, right, Cliff, when you're in this early process, you're still working on a lot of those components, and, you still have so much more to deal with. So it's early in the process, and we're really trying to figure out from the input that we're getting what these things are and how we're going to develop them further and how we can address them. And I would like to present to Cliff, perhaps he hasn't been, privy to the the process that we've gone through to this point and how the project has evolved and what we have done to mitigate a lot of concerns initially from setbacks, from massing, so I think that it would be great for him to see how we have addressed a lot of these things from the beginning of our presentations. And then I think that that would be, the next steps that I would like to do. So if Cliff, you're open to having a discussion, I would be happy to come down and have a talk and we can go through these things.
Terrific.
Have you finished your comments, Mr. Valdez?
I have finished my comments. Thank you very much,
Thank
John.
you for participating tonight. We appreciate that very much. Ms. Corcoran, are you available to either ask any questions or to make any comments?
I am
Mr. Chairman,
available,
I just was going to ask if we could have a recess. I mean, Jen, you're welcome to speak. It's, your project, but, a 2-minute recess, it's awkward on Zoom because I can't, talk quickly to my client sitting next to me. If you just want to proceed, Jen, that's fine. But I was thinking of a 1-minute recess just for Jen and I to talk on the phone.
I'm comfortable just proceeding, actually.
Okay, that's
Thank
fine.
you. No, thank you very much. So I lost my train of thought there. I don't really have, I think that as with most things, as we've done in the previous peer review sessions, the presentation, Cliff, I thank you very much for your comments. That we will, certainly be, submitting written responses to the comments. And Frank and Cliff, I think it would be spectacular if, you could communicate. I also love the idea of the working session. I think, what I feel like this process has lacked slightly is like the live input that we usually get, from the public in these meetings. We haven't had so much of that as it's been kind of filtered through Attorney Galvin, which is excellent, obviously, but we haven't gotten a lot of kind of working group type things tend to happen in these meetings traditionally. What I was wondering, so I'm looking, I've been trying to figure out, what this revision process will look like. I do agree that the working group will be a part of that, and I like that a lot. But as a team, I think comprehensively, I'd like to kind of revisit everything over the next few weeks. I do not know if we'll have a full comprehensive revision complete by the 17th. And I know that we've already prepared, some responses to the stormwater. I know that VHB and Tetra Tech are working together on that. And, kind of going back and forth. Traffic, we've had done for a little while since we got that peer review so early. But as we all know, all these three components really tie together. And so in order to, properly address the traffic issues and the civil issues, that will take some design work too. And I would almost rather, comprehensively look at it all together and then come back with, a plan that addresses all three of those issues. I just don't know if we'll have, and it's up for discussion, as to whether we'll, as to what, the 17th, what that meeting would be. But I just wanted to put that out there that, we're probably looking at, we've planned on making revisions at some point in the process. And this seems to be that point now that most of the comments are in. So yeah.
Cliff, would it be okay for you and I to try to schedule a meeting to meet before the 17th to go over some of these things?
That works, but I think what maybe I was hearing from Jen, which I think is a good idea, which is look at all three of the peer reviews, because there are some commonalities there. And if I would say if we met after you'd had some time to sort of integrate your thinking, with all those three and, with very simple sketches, even in ways that you think you've really nailed it with all three of the reviewers. That might be more productive to have some new material to respond to before we meet.
Yeah, I just feel like at this point in the process, we've heard a lot of similar issues, throughout each meeting, and that's great for us because I think the repetition really drives home,
Yeah.
what the issues are that really
That's
need
right.
the most work. You've mentioned a lot of civil issues, civil mentioned traffic mentioned civil, so it just seems to me like it might be the best use. I'm trying to really just be as efficient as possible here with everybody's time. I know that the board is probably pretty exhausted from all of their meetings too. So I just want to make sure that we're making every single meeting really count. And so, I don't know. I know that the 24th is currently scheduled for the Ice House, and I don't know, where that project is at or anything. Or if there's an opportunity to swap maybe with them and for them to go on the 17th, just kind of spitballing here. But that's just kind of what as I'm trying to kind of, think through the next technically 6 weeks that we have left in the review, although of course we're, open to continuing the process. I'm just trying to kind of, think of that timeline in my head as I tend to do, and how, we can kind of pack the most into each of these sessions that we have, and also be doing, work that will mean something later on in between.
Okay, that's, we appreciate your
Mhm.
comment on scheduling. Do you have any other comments on any of the testimony tonight that you want to make?
I actually do have a really quick question. This was just one of the things it was almost like a brain teaser of sorts when you were talking about, the 5,000 square feet that we have for the roof deck and how that could be kind of redistributed. And maybe this is something that comes through the working session, but I was trying to figure out how to put that square footage, somewhere else, on the ground floor, and it just isn't really making sense to me. So would you be able to give an example of kind of like that type of redistribution? It might just
Yeah.
be my Thursday night brain right now, but just couldn't visualize kind of what you meant by that.
Well, the only track I've gone down, and again, I try not to be the designer of the building, but the only track I've gone down was, I think there would have to be a willingness to reduce the number of parking spaces. Because I think that I understand that and I'm again just intuiting that your reaction to mass housing was to remove that northernmost stack of units.
Hmm.
And, again, that's not the most efficient way to do multifamily buildings. You, you could achieve the same mitigation with still having maybe a narrower double loaded configuration, but increasing the setback from the street, which would result in fewer parking spaces overall. So I think that was the only thing I thought of is it's a lot of space. It is, and I think Frank was reacting to one comment I made. It's a very big space. It could be kind of an amazing planted, vegetative roof area as well, with with very limited, maybe still some passive recreation, but 5,400 square feet is a lot of common space in a building of this size. So that's what I was thinking, Jed. I didn't have it figured out at all, but I really do appreciate your idea of if you're hearing consistent reaction to it, work with all of those comments, do some quick sketching of ideas. I don't think there is a way to directly take that 5,400 square feet, but you can reduce the 5,400 square feet and then maybe make better use of that courtyard space is kind of where my head was going with it.
All right,
Ms.
thank
Corcoran, do
you.
you have any follow-up?
I don't believe I do actually. I think that's kind of all I've got, and I look forward to kind of continuing the conversation, in a working session or.
Okay, that's wonderful. Thank you very much. We'll defer on the issue of the timing of the next hearing for a few minutes, and let me ask our trustee clerk, Bev Sutton. Bev, are there any members of the public out there who have their hands raised to ask Mr. Bomer any questions?
There are no hands up.
Okay, so there are no hands up.
Oh,
Then-
wait a minute. We now have two. We have Margaret Vaughn.
I'm sorry, could you say that again? Margaret,
Margaret, hello? Margaret Vaughn.
Margaret Vaughn, okay. Ms. Vaughn, are you there?
Here I am.
No,
Um,
Margaret Honey Vaughn.
yeah, well, if there's anybody old enough there, they'll know who Honey Bond is.
Well, welcome to the Board of Appeals.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you for your patience. So what question do you have of Mr. Boma?
I don't know if it's a question. It's probably more of a statement. Um,
What statement do you have? And then we'll have
right.
Homer comment on any statement. that
Yeah, there's a couple of things. I'm somewhat familiar with Davis Square and a lot of the nice things they've done around those kinds of areas. And I think Milton certainly needs some change. But overall, and there's not much more that I can say. I just think that whole thing is just too big. And that's pretty much my statement. This is not a city. People are here because it's a suburb. Well, a question I do have seriously is like the recreation space. I just heard that right now. It's like, you know, what are people going to do in that amount of recreation space in the middle of East Milton Square? I don't know. You know, that's a question, a serious one. I also have to comment that this has been a really nice meeting to listen to. And I've enjoyed it. And clearly, you know, I have a position on this. I just think the projects they're trying to put in East Milton Square are not designed for the space they're trying to do. So
Okay.
thank you for listening.
Okay, thank you very much. And let me just ask Cliff Bomer, do you want to generally comment on Ms. Vaughn's suggestion that about the recreation space that's proposed for the project in a very general sense?
Well, yeah, I mean, again, I think it's disproportionate, you know, given the other recreation spaces that are actually specified and appear to be too small. But I think what I react to from that comment goes back to what I think it was Mr. Mullen who was talking about streetscape. And I think the key to integrating a building of significantly larger scale is really making a convincing streetscape. And I think that was spot on of really the next round of design exploration should just look at the streetscape, just isolate that as something that you really want to make work, and then see how that impacts the building design. So look at it from the outside in.
Great. Thank you very much, Bev. Do we have another member of the public who has a question?
We do, the Shaughnessy's.
Would you please, is it?
Oh,
Mr.
unmute, sorry.
You guys hear me?
There
the
we are.
Shaughnessy family? Okay, here.
Hi,
Who's-
my name is Shane Shaughnessy.
Great. Where do you live, Shane?
I'm at 30 Franklin Street with my husband and my 3 small children. We are a direct abutter to the proposed building, which would literally be in the shadow of this project. You know, I've spoken many times regarding this project, and, you know, from day one, we've been overwhelmed with the number of units that have been proposed. You know, it went from 60 something to 70 to 55, and now 111 down to 101. And I've spoken again many times over many issues that are personal, of course, to my family and to our neighborhood. Public safety being one of them. It's frightening around here as is. The school capacity, the scale of the project, the privacy that's being taken away from us, the lighting, which I'm looking out at right now, out of my bedroom window, would just be a wall of windows. The natural spring that runs below us that floods our basement anytime the water tables rise. But this is, and I have to thank you for this, this is the first time that we have heard anybody speak about construction management related to this project. So my question was, and I know Mr. Valdez had pointed out that this is just a schematic design and it's not a critical component right now, but it is a critical component. It's a massive scale of a project. How long are they anticipating this project to construct? How many contractors and subcontractors are they anticipating? Where would they park their cars, the workers that are coming to park? As many of you know on this board, a total of 11 parking spaces were just taking out of the town from the deck project. So that's 11 spots that were just lost that are constantly full with people coming and going to the square. What would the hours of the construction be? How would you access Bassett and Franklin? What's the impact? How would I get out of my driveway that is on Bassett and my front door is on Franklin? So those are my multitude of questions regarding construction. I took a non-architectural measurement this evening, and the end of my driveway to the other side of the curb across the way on Bassett is approximately 20 feet away from me. So it's a huge concern of ours, along with all of those other points that I could talk hours about, but I will try to maintain just this one thought this evening. That's my question and sort of, I guess, my statements.
Okay.
Thank you for allowing me to speak, Mr. Leonard.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Shaughnessy. Let me do this with a preface. Mr. Bomer, I know you're not the architect for the applicant, and some of these questions dealing with the number of parking spaces and how long to construct and all of that may be beyond the scope of your engagement here, and the hours of construction and all of that. But do you want to generally address Mrs. Shaughnessy's concerns?
Yeah, and it's a real issue, and I'm looking at the existing condition site survey right now, and that corner of Franklin is, I think her house is one that is white and it has a tall white fence around it. I think that's
I'm
her
on the
house.
opposite corner. So the one with the white fence is basically completely newly renovated. I'm on the corner of Franklin, across from the residential area of the proposed project. So it is a
Okay.
white house, but I have
Yeah.
just hedges around the front.
Yeah. Well, again, I think in my report, I think, and I think the civil and traffic all cite that particular intersection as being the one that really requires the most care, and I think rethinking the construction. Yeah, I mean, this project, I'm guessing, and the developer knows better than I do because they've been really studying this in greater detail. But I'm guessing it's a 14 to 16 month project. So and the building department will require a really detailed construction management plan for sure.
Thanks, Mr. Bomer. Mr. Valdez, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but do you want to weigh in on some of Ms. Shaughnessy's questions? Do you prefer to wait after you've had a chance to talk with Mr. Bomer and your colleagues?
No, it's fine. No, if I mispronounce it, please, I apologize, Ms. Shaughnessy. Your concerns are completely legitimate. I mean, of course, nobody likes any type of construction of the scale next to their house. It's disruptive, and the management of that is always a key issue, and how we manage it is the component that we always need to deal with. And yes, I would agree with Cliff that this is anywhere between a 14 to 16-month construction. Yes, I mean, to no more than that, I think. And there are many ways of mitigating some of your concerns, and we like to take those concerns and hear them. The idea of parking, of course, is always an issue. I live in Somerville, as I was saying before, and we had a huge high school project renovation here that just happened, and that was a huge parking issue that we as a community talked about, and it was mitigated in a way that it was people parked in a place that was controlled by the city, and then people were bussed in. There's many ways of mitigating this, and I can't say how we're going to get to this point, but I think that your concerns are good. That we need to deal with how this is going to be done in a fashion that is not disruptive in a multitude of ways to your way of life, and that it does not disrupt the way that you get out of your house, and that the way that you leave and come back. And it's a concern, and we like to make sure that we work with the neighbors and make sure that we mitigate these things early in the process. And I think that as we keep moving forward, we would like to engage the community, immediate community, to make sure that we deal with this. But yes, it does happen, and we want to make sure that we deal with the things accordingly.
Good, thanks, Mr. Valdez. I appreciate your stepping in there when you didn't really have to. Let me ask Bev Sutton, is there anybody else out there, a member of the public who has their hands raised?
Yes, we have 4 more. Jim Coyle?
Okay. Mr. Coyle, are you there?
Yes, I am. Jim Coyle, a resident of East Milton and a town meeting member. I'm going to make one suggestion to the board here. I think we need another peer review firm, a very senior construction management firm. There are an incredible number of very serious construction issues for this project here that have not been discussed at all. I'll give you just one example. I'd probably come up with 100 here right now. The picking up on Tetra Tech on their comments about the building of foundations are right up to the property line, right up to Adams Court, and right up to the sidewalk there. In order to install that foundation, let's say it has a spread footing, Adams Court will be blocked off completely, which will impact the large number of businesses on Granite. Their rear exits there, one of their means of egress will be blocked off substantially. And that's totally unacceptable. And the only way to solve that is to shrink the size of the project and pull it back from Adams Court so that the boundaries of this project are, including the construction work of excavation and whatever else is needed, are stay within the property. The setbacks need to be increased on all sides. And the same thing is on the other end of the property. Tetra Tech said the same thing there, basically. Adams Court has 7 environmental monitoring wells on it. They say basically do not disturb. I've asked this question before. There has been no response from at all so far on this. The environmental site investigation there hasn't been done. I don't think legally this project can touch Adams Court at all until those questions are answered. And the size of the equipment here, this is a huge project. I also did a quick survey on the density of the project. I looked at the Mass Housing website a couple of months ago. I couldn't find any examples on there of a 40B project that were this dense at all. There were some that were installed, put along a Route 9 in a residential area out there. Buffer zones were created. The sites were much larger. I think, and the corner of Franklin and Bassett is a huge problem. I suggest to the Corcoran Company, take a walk over to the corner of McGrath and Washington, and there's a 4-story apartment building there that created a little side street to get the flow of traffic out of the way. It's very wide sidewalks. So it'd be a good example to use to redesign this project. It needs to shrink in all directions to be constructible, period. I've done construction projects for 45 years. I've seen it all. This board needs advice from a senior construction management company for the safety of the public and the protection of everybody. There's no buffer zone around this project at all. How are you going to keep the little children in the neighborhood out of the curiosity is going to be enormous here. We already have a large number of pedestrians walking along Adam Street and Franklin and Bassett all the time. People are riding bicycles. It's the too much disturbance to a resident. This is, by the way, a residential neighborhood. Most of the building is in a residential C neighborhood. And I think it's incredibly unfair to the Shaughnessy's and all their neighbors along Franklin Street there and the Bassett and all to even have anywhere near close to this. I'd like to see it shrink by maybe cut in half or maybe 2/3 of what it is. I think something could go there, but this is not the right project at all. It's just way too big. The other thing, I think the corner of Franklin and Bassett, I think the approval and from the Traffic Commission of Milton needs to be part of the review process. Mr. Leonard, maybe you already have that in mind, I'm not sure, but I think it should be a must here. They need to weigh in. There's many shortcomings in the traffic, the peer review and the basic design that are lacking here. And I think the public needs to be able to comment a lot more on that. I think I've said enough about that, but the constructability of this project is a big challenge. And at an early stage like this, I've worked with developers before, a constructability review. What is your game plan to build this place? That needs to be done now in the schematic phase. It's way too late to do it later because you'll miss some of the big things. Is there bedrock under this site here? The environmental, the runoff, what is the seasonal water table variation, for example, under this property here? Tetra Tech raised some of these issues. Those need to be addressed upfront. They could change the whole design significantly, as Mr. Bamer said. I'm done.
Great, thanks, Mr. Quayle. We appreciate all of your comments. Let me ask Bev, is there anybody else who has their hand raised?
Kim Conroy?
Hello, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Hi, Kim, how are you?
Good, thank you. So this is Kim Conroy. I reside at 19 Emerson Road with my husband and 2 young children. First off, I want to make it clear that I support responsible development in Milton, and that includes both affordable housing and commercial real estate. That being said, there are so many components of this development that I feel are irresponsible and should in fact be considered detrimental to the residents and business owners of East Milton. One topic that I continue to find unsettling is the applicant has touted public transportation and biking to public transportation. The reality is that neither are viable options for most people on a regular basis due to the added commute time of walking, biking, or busing to the MBTA train versus driving, limitations posed by the forces of nature and New England weather, and concern over pedestrian safety. After the very unfortunate incident involving an MBTA bus and a teenager just last week, it really hit home just how congested East Milton Square is, and that the only streets that are safe for pedestrians or bikers are the neighborhood streets. With this, I have to ask, how can the applicant assure that the neighbors, that cars and SUVs of all different sizes from those who don't get a space on site won't end up parked in our neighborhood? Our East Milton neighborhood is already busting at the seams. Our very narrow streets are flooded with families of all ages, from the very young to seniors, walking, jogging, and biking. It also should be noted that our neighborhood's houses the busiest of all of Milton parks, with Andrews, which not only acts as home field for many of Milton youth sports programs, such as softball, baseball, lacrosse, and soccer, but also houses the only fully accessible playground in all of Milton. Adding more congestion is dangerous for the families that live here, as well as the families that play here. And lastly, to Mr. Valdez's comments, I appreciate your sharing your experience with Somerville and similar struggles, but it should be noted that Somerville is a city, whereas Milton is not, and Somerville has nearly 3 times the population of the town of Milton. So it's really not an apples to apples comparison. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ms. Conroy. Bev, any other member of the public?
Yes, Bernadette McAvoy.
Mr. McElroy, are you there?
Yes. Yep.
Yes.
Hmm.
Well, maybe she's taken a time out. Is there, let's.
Yep, I'm sorry, Michael. Mahalchik.
Hi, thank Mahalchik.
Yep.
I know it's tough to say that name.
I think I got it right.
Um, I'm a town meeting member like Jim Foyle in Precinct 7, and I've been in East Milton for 22 years. And I think my concerns were raised by Kim Conroy about the issue of bicycle and public transportation. I would like to ask the question, really, what kind of mitigation would be proposed to make bike riding safe? I personally come from a point of view that bike riding should be encouraged. I was involved in organizing the Rotary Bike Day for 3 years, where there was a race. I was on the bike advisory committee of the town for a while. I lived in Holland from 1971 to 72. I think bikes are a great way to get around, very healthy, could potentially free up some parking spaces to turn into something else as your project is set back from the street. But a lot of people I talk to around here think I'm crazy. I went for 4 years without a car and was able to get by, not in the snow, but it was a good way to get around. So I would like to hear how, is there any kind of mitigation that could be done to make it a little safer on Granite Avenue to use it? Would there be some consideration for doing something to help get people riding bikes from East Milton over to the bikeway? Because there's an off ramp on Interstate 93 that kind of makes things unsafe. Or how about, I can remember taking a bus from the corner of Granite Place and Adams Street to Seaport District with my wife for a weekend away in a hotel, and it took us under an hour to go door to door to the hotel in the Seaport. So I know that you can move quickly on public transit, but it doesn't come very often. So relying on it to, like I did for 4 years, I wound up walking to Wollaston a lot of times. That's not realistic for a lot of people. So yeah, so is there anything we could do to like increase the frequency of buses, make the bike riding safer, and what other kind of mitigation to make it like, if you locked up your bike, would you be sure that it was there? Could you make some kind of secure place to keep a bicycle there? How about zip cars? Any chance of getting a few of those in there?
Okay,
so
that's a good question. Let's stop right there and let's have Mr. Ballmer.
Those are all my questions. Thanks very much.
Okay,
I'll
good.
go on mute.
Okay, well, thank you for appearing tonight. Mr. Ballmer, can you address, I know you haven't done a bike study or a sophisticated study, but can you address in a general sense how one constructing a project like this can try to ensure the safe and free movement of bicycles and safe operations of bicycles in the vicinity of this project?
Well, certainly, there are a lot of different levels just internally within the development. I think the developer would certainly benefit them to produce a really robust transportation demand management plan that would include, that could address several of those points. He was just saying that the bus works, but it doesn't run very frequently. Part of many transportation demand management plans are schedules, live monitors that tell you when buses are arriving, et cetera, that make it more realistic. The car sharing services are a terrific way to balance, balance the inevitable need for cars with a predisposition to not want to take cars. I think that works really well. I think, in my report pointed out that there really is very minimal bike parking, certainly secure bike parking, direct access to secure parking for the residents is critical, as well as sufficient bike racks for visitors to the residents. Ultimately, and if you've lived in Holland or visited Holland, what makes biking in Holland work is the sheer number of bikers there that just increasing the number of people inherently helps increase the safety of bicycles. I'm not sure whether he was talking about potentially some off-site improvements, contributing to a town study to create dedicated bike lanes. I don't really know, but all those comments were spot on as far as I'm concerned. I think the building should, given where it is, enact every measure they possibly can to encourage alternative transportation.
Great, thanks, Mr. Ballmer. Bev, do we have any other public questions?
And we have Margaret Vaughn. Again.
Ms. Vaughn, are you there?
Yep, I am. I do have a question now. Is there going to be a time when there's going to be that the public can attend a meeting in person to give, to have their input presented?
Well, that's a question, probably is a better question for me than Mr. Bomer or the other witnesses.
Okay.
The way I understand this process at the present time, that and Mr. Mullen has all of this information right at his hand. I believe that at the present time, the video or visual hearings can continue. I believe it's until August 15th. Is that correct, Jeff? I
It's
think
right now, June 15th.
June 15th rather than August 15th.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's got a bill pending in the legislature to extend it.
Right, and I think do you believe that it's commonly considered highly likely that it will be continued from June 15th to either August or September 15th?
Yeah, yes, that's the consensus.
And then the question really becomes whether it gets extended beyond, let's say, September 15th, and so that actual hearings would be required rather than virtual hearings.
So the question then really is, like, I mean, I don't know, I haven't come to these meetings too much, but it seems like the public and the Milton community doesn't have a real option for input in this. I mean, by September, it's probably going to be much further than it is right now, right?
Well, I think, Ms. Vaughn, with all due respect, the hearings in this particular case began on April 15th. I haven't counted the number of hearings we've had, but I think I can. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is our 6th or 7th hearing.
Yeah.
All of those hearings have been open to the public. All of them, the public had an opportunity to ask questions. For those who were on vacations or were ill or whatever, they've all been tape recorded. There's public access to all of to every minute of the hearing. So,
So I'm really curious. I just, don't know how this all works. So did you get a lot of community response to think over?
I think we got some community response. I don't think we received as much as we probably expected, but I think the reason for that, most respectfully, and I'm not acting as an advocate here, but I think that Bob Galvin, who's a very experienced attorney in 40B projects, represents the East Milton Neighborhood Association. And I saw an email recently, I think it was within the last day or two, and I think Mr. Galvin indicated that association consists of at least 700 members of people who live in the East Milton community. And they've been working very closely with Bob, and he's been working with them. So I think that Mr. Galvin refines their thoughts into questions which are admissible and legal theories that are appropriate under 40B. So I think that's the reason there hasn't been a lot of questioning from the public is because Bob represents them and he asks intelligent questions. But that doesn't mean, with all due respect, that you don't have the right to ask a question at these hearings. Anybody.
Oh, I understand that. I understand that. I just don't get the community feeling, like how much the Milton residents are inputting on this. And I'm just here sitting by myself. So, I mean, I have heard people not too happy with a lot of stuff, but that this building here is not even up yet. I'm just saying how many, do you think more people would come when there's face to face? I guess that's what I'm saying, and more people would speak.
No, I
think that,
I really don't know. I'm not a.
yeah. I
there
mean,
are-
for a lot of people, the Zoom is kind of, you know, threatening. So I was just curious what your
No,
guess would be.
That's interesting to hear you say that because, you know, in terms of threatening, in the 7 hearings we've had or 8 hearings we've had, I don't know. There hasn't been tremendous questioning from individuals of the regarding the project, but
Yeah.
I don't think for those people who are afraid to communicate on Zoom or find it difficult to communicate on Zoom, well, you can write letters, and I don't recall receiving very many letters regarding this project.
Okay.
I think part of it, to be frank, and is that many of the issues that you're hearing discussed here are amongst expert developers, lawyers who represent the 40B applicants, and some lawyers who oppose 40B applications. The law is complicated. The case law is complex. And so, yeah, I
No,
think
that's okay. I'm getting the
who want the professionals may have difficulty posing very tight and specific questions to a witness like Cliff Bomer, who's been, I think, doing this over 40 years.
Yeah.
So that may be part of the reason.
No, I understand what you're saying. I'm just, you know, I don't expect us residents to have the, you know, the knowledge of the construction people. I'm just.
But I tell you very respectfully, there's a whole workbook that is on our website that, at least to the extent possible, tries to reduce the complexity of some of these the issues.
Well, Mr. Bowman did a great job.
Mr. Bowman was a wonderful witness.
Yeah, he did a great job.
Now,
But I don't want to take any more time because I know these can get late. I just wanted to, you know, ask you that
No,
question.
I hear you, and I guess the simple answer is we don't know whether, if this gets kicked over, the ability to have Zoom hearings until September 15th. I don't know whether these, and after that you have to have in-person hearings.
But that's okay. I'm getting the drift. I just had, you know, my hands are kind of tied. It's all kind of new to me, but I am very concerned about the square. So I just wanted to get as much information as I can.
Yeah,
But
I mean, I
thank
suggest if it doesn't put you to sleep, that you go back and listen to some of our earlier hearings, and they'll inform you what everyone thinks about the project from a
Okay.
technical
Th-
standpoint. Okay.
Thank you. And yeah, I won't take your time. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Vaughn. We appreciate very much. Bev, is there anybody else out there?
Yes, Bernadette McAvoy.
Ms. McAvoy, are you there?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I had headphones on and apparently you couldn't hear me. I don't know, so I unplugged them earlier.
Great. Welcome to the Board of Appeals.
Thank you. My name is Bernadette McAvoy. I'm a proud resident of East Milton. I was born and raised in East Milton. I'm now raising 3 children in East Milton in a multi-generational home. I'm lucky to have my mom, you know, welcome us into her home. We've been here for years. And my children love Milton, the Milton schools. They love Andrews Park, Crane Park, Cunningham, all the beautiful places in East Milton, and they have beautiful neighbors. We have, I'm glad Mrs. Vaughn brought up that point about the Zoom meetings. There are lots of elderly neighbors who I'm sure aren't using Zoom. So I agree with the fact that this should be put off so that there can be people in person This is kind of a lot of things are being rushed through during a pandemic. I mean, there's people who have lost family members, who have lost loved ones, and people are afraid. It's a really tough time and a challenging time. So, I hope that you could consider delaying so people can meet in person, and not just elderly people. I'm sure there are a lot of tech savvy elderly people as well, but there are some who are not. And so that's just a fact. I think it's something to be considered. There are a lot of beautiful residents of East Milton who are in that age bracket, and they need to be heard. So I would like to ask a few questions.
Now your questions of Mr. Ballmer, right? Because
Okay, so I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
I'm sorry, please, let me talk. We're not here to ask questions about the project generally. This hearing is concerning Mr. Ballmer and his peer review of the project. So if you have questions for Mr. Ballmer, he's here and delighted to answer any of your questions.
Okay, should I turn my questions into comments? Would that work better?
Well, you can make it. Sure. Look, this isn't a court. You can make a comment and ask Mr. Ballmer to comment on your comment, or what his position is on your comment.
Okay, and Cliff,
As long as they're within the purview of Mr. Ballmer's peer review, we're not going to be asking Mr. Ballmer to discuss issues that are beyond the scope of his responsibility here.
Okay.
But you go ahead, ask your questions, and if the questions are out of line, we'll say so.
Can I ask questions about the size of the project, the street that's in the middle, smack in the middle of the project, and
go ahead,
and the modes of transportation of the residents?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So the first is, do you think that this project is an appropriate size and scale for this tiny corner that it's being proposed on? That's one question.
Okay, well, let's have Mr. Ballmer address that question, because if we have 4 or 5 questions in a row, it gets very confusing. So,
okay, thank you.
Cliff, do you want to address that question about the size of the project?
Yeah, I think most of I think I've consistently pointed out that I think there's work that needs to be done on the setbacks from the streets, and that inevitably will impact the size of the project. As I was saying earlier, the impact of the scale of a project is among many other things, but it's as perceived from the street in the neighborhood is a combination of the height of the building and the setback from the streets. So as currently designed, I'm suspect that there hasn't been enough mitigation of the scale of the building vis-a-vis setbacks of the building. What I suggested in my letter that really helps everybody understand it, so you don't really need to rely on people who are trained at designing buildings. What will really help the board and the public is some more thorough documentation of the building, not detailed as far as siting patterns or materials, but really specifically addressing, is the scale appropriate? And that would include more three-dimensional views, I think, site and sectional drawings that cut through the building and across the street and show the neighbors across the street. So you need some more descriptive documents to be able to really answer that question of, is it the right size or not?
Great.
Thank you. And would you propose a lower number that you would, off the top of your head, think that would be more appropriate? Number of units?
That's really hard for me, because there are a lot of variables there. I think for me, getting the massing correct, back to what you originally said about the scale of the building. For me, that's mainly about massing and streetscape. Those are the kinds of questions. How many units fit in it? It kind of crosses over into other issues number of cars is one, traffic, potential traffic issues, whether, as it was talked about in the civil report, whether the services, available services are adequate for the number of proposed units. So for me, it's almost, I look at it from the other direction, just as the architectural reviewer. I look at it from the scale of the building and setbacks and streetscapes. As far as the exact number of units, that to me comes after being convinced that the overall scale and streetscape is suitable.
Okay, thank you. My next question is about the Franklin, the section of Franklin Street from Adams to Bassett.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if there were any plans that you know of, or anybody has proposed to shut this down and make it a pedestrian area. I'm wondering because I know there was a proposal, a temporary, which sometimes happens to end up to be permanent, of shutting down that street during COVID, the pandemic, which I thought was absurd, but it was supposed to be winter wonderland during a pandemic. I just couldn't grasp that. But anyway, so it was a temporary proposal to shut down that section of Franklin. And now I see 4 huge flower boxes on Franklin, that section of Franklin, taking up 2 spaces, parking spaces, which is, I don't know, I can't relate to that either. But anyway, so I'm wondering, is there some move to shut this down and try to make it be, really convenient for somebody who has a project here and the businesses that would suit them? Just wondering if that's something that you've seen or heard of. I just figured I'd ask because it is a worry.
Well, my comment I don't know about the town's intentions on that street, but in my report, I do talk about making the street more pedestrian friendly. That side of the proposed development has really minimal setback and relatively narrow sidewalks. So for me, making it more pedestrian friendly, that I do think there is, if there was an appetite for a mixed use building, that could be that leg of the building, the first floor level could potentially be a good space for commercial use as opposed to residential use. But that's as far as I dug into that, was just enhancing the pedestrian experience on that side of the street by increasing the setback.
Okay, so so it doesn't sound like that has been proposed. That's a fear that is kind of hanging over a lot of people. But anyway,
I know nothing about that.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. That's good to hear. Thank you so much. Because that would be a huge detriment to the East Milton Square and the whole of East Milton. But anyway, thank you very much. The next question is about this idea that the residents that would move into, or the potential residents that would move into this 101 unit high rise in East Milton Square, that they would all, or a lot of them, or majority, I don't know the exact number or percentage that was proposed, that would be cycling around town and riding the T. I find that to be very implausible. I find it to be very hard to believe. Anyway, so that's an issue. And there's a blessing of the bikes at St. Agatha's next week. My children will be planning to go to, and I think they need a blessing before they try to attempt to cross East Milton Square to get to St. Agatha's, because it's very dangerous. So to think that all these people are going to be riding around town, throwing their children on the back of their bikes to bring them to school, to bring them to their games, to go grocery shopping, is absurd. What do you think about this idea that the people will be, motor transportation will be mostly cycling? And of course, cycling is wonderful, but I just don't think it's going to happen. And also the T ridership. Do you think that's going to be the majority of modes of transportation, I should say, of the
Yeah,
majority of people?
I understand your question. I don't think I can really speak to that, though. I'm not really cognizant of the target population of the building or their transportation modes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. The last question or the last comment would be that, you know, doesn't necessarily relate to you, but just these developers have an opportunity to cut down the size and scope of this project. Think outside the box, leave something that is a lasting legacy, that is a positive contribution to the town, as opposed to a negative, you know, a detriment to the town. And so I would say that that would be something that would be a challenge to the developers. Think outside the box, leave a lasting legacy. You know, to Milton, wonderful Milton families, I think you would want to leave a lasting legacy, not an unwelcome, you know, problematic high rise that is urbanizing a beautiful small town that I grew up in, that I love, and I know the two families who are developing this area do as well. So that's a challenge I put out to you. And I hope you can try to meet that and really listen to the residents of East Milton who don't feel heard, even though people have spoken. It doesn't seem that they're being heard, and that's just a concern. And we know these two beautiful families can come together and think outside the box and leave a lasting legacy. Do something no one's ever done before. I put that challenge out there. Thank you very much. I appreciate the time. Appreciate this meeting. Take care.
Thank you, Ms. McAvoy. We appreciate very much. Bev, is there any other member of the public out there?
Beth Alvarez.
I'm sorry, Bev.
Beth Alvarez.
Yes. Hello, can you hear me?
We can. Welcome
Yes,
to the
hi.
floor.
Thank you. I'm a Milton resident. I live just down the road from the project on 635 Adams Street. And I'm thrilled with the questions that all of our neighbors have asked so far. I'm just curious, Mr. Bomer, how you feel about the sustainability of this project, if you feel that the developers have done a good job creating a building that will be in the square for a long time, and if it's been designed in a green way, and if you think that there will be any impact on the community in terms of pollution. And then the third part of my question is, in terms of parking, have they designated spaces for electric vehicles for the future? You know, that it's predicted that over the years, more and more people will be driving electric vehicles.
Those are all really good questions. I think at this point, the design team, I'm not the designer, but the sustainable goals are not really discernible from where the project is at this point. It's in schematic design. Milton is, I think, any building in Milton, and I note this in the report, that Milton is a stretch code community. So there's a minimum level of sustainability that's required by the state building code, a special section of which Milton has adopted. But I personally certainly believe that you're spot on in the sense that long-term sustainability of the project is a great goal. And I think most responsible developers really look towards that. There are many programs, many third-party sustainable programs that are available that make the building more marketable and certainly more affordable for people who live there. So now is the time to think about those kinds of goals, to lay out your sustainable goals. At this point, it's not, I wasn't able to tell from what's submitted today where they're really at on that front.
And the second question related to pollution.
Well, you know, it's funny, a lot of different communities are looking at that very carefully right now. I'm sure you know that Brookline has adopted zero emissions. A lot of communities are looking at that now of buildings not having any fossil fuel burning appliances within the building. I don't know what the developer's intent is at this point. In my report, I did note that in addition to what we've learned about the importance of ventilation in buildings and containment of units so that people can control their own environment within their apartment. This, as you know, this is a big building and it's very close to Route 93. So I did suggest that they look at ways to ensure that their fresh air is really takes into account what could be diminished air quality because of their proximity to 93.
And I think the third part of Ms. Alvarez's question related to whether the project should contain spaces, should accommodate spaces for electric vehicles.
It's certainly my position that it should. It's the way of the world. We all know it's happening. And interestingly, it is something that needs to be committed to early. And the reason is that actually the number of EV spaces that you provide has a big impact on the power supply that you need to bring into the building. So it's a commitment you need to make early so that you can size your transformer and other pieces of equipment to be able to accommodate it.
Great. Thanks, Mr. Bomer, and thank you, Ms. Alvarez, for your questions. Bev, is there anybody else out there from the public?
We have one more, Andrew. Andrew? D'Amato?
No, well, maybe Andrew has.
No, Andrew is here. I'm sorry.
Good.
Back to someone else's point. I consider myself tech savvy, but my Zoom is been glitchy today. So I apologize for that. Thank you for listening to me. Mr. Bulmer had mentioned before that there were, setback issues that may cause or probably will cause modifications in the building size and maybe density and number of units. And I was curious, are we putting the cart before the horse here in discussing the architecturals when we don't know what the size is actually going to be?
Cliff, do you want to address Mr. D'Amato's question?
That's interesting. I think that's almost exactly what I was trying to say a little while ago, that the size, for me, the as far as number of units, number of parking spaces, it's very important to know what kind of massing can be supported on that site. That's a kind of intensity of use calculation versus a density calculation. Density talks about number of units per acre. Intensity of use is a more kind of broader look at whether what you're proposing for that site really fits on that site, both from the perspective of the building itself, but also its impact on the neighborhood. So for me, establishing what is the appropriate massing for that site is the first thing that needs to be established before you go into great detail about certainly unit count and parking spaces. Does that make sense?
It does. Well, it does to me, and I think it does to the public. Mr. D'Amato, if you have no further questions, thank you for appearing and participating. Bev, is there anybody else out there?
There is no more attendees. Tim Zawinski has his hand up and he has for some time, but we want to allow the attendees to.
Hello?
Yes, Mr. D'Amato again?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just had one other thing, and I don't, again, my Zoom has been so glitchy, I can't, it muted me, so I apologize for that. But
Go ahead.
I do have one question in general with the architecturals that are going on, and I apologize if this was brought up earlier because I, again, had some issues and I wasn't available for the whole meeting. But I wanted to talk a little bit about this amenity deck that is part of this project. And my question is, it's going to be so high above the street level. And I'm wondering why that amenity deck is facing the neighborhood rather than turned inside towards the building parking lot. And if that's something we can look at, because I don't think the nearby residents are going to really appreciate people looking down at them from the 6th floor or whatever floor it happens to be on. And, I'm wondering how that is going to be policed and, how long, people are going to be allowed on those amenity decks. Is it going to be 9 o'clock at night, supposedly, but who's going to police that and how they're going to stop that? That just seems really intrusive to the neighborhood. And, if you wanted the amenity deck, I thought maybe you could turn that inward.
Cliff Bowman, do you want to address
Yeah,
that?
yeah, I think the developers acknowledge they haven't programmed that amenity deck at this point. The reason it's there, and I hope I'm correct, I think I am, that the reason that amenity deck or that space is there was to diminish the height of the building along Bassett Street, to pull the top stories back, to diminish just the impact on the street itself of the height of the building, but also shadow impact to the buildings to the north. That's how I believe that's how that deck appeared in the program relative to the initial submission to Mass Housing. I think the developer said earlier tonight that what that deck actually will be is hasn't been determined yet.
Yeah, well, that sort of goes back to my original point. Well, this isn't determined, that isn't determined, and yet we're supposed to be making comments and about them. So we don't know if the amenity deck is there, but yet we we have to discuss it. You could set back the building and not have an amenity deck. The amenity deck is, in my opinion, is trading one problem for another. You may be setting the building back and possibly helping shadowing. I don't know how that actually works because, eventually you get up to the 6th floor and you're going to get shadowed. But, and then you're trading that for this intrusiveness, to the existing neighbors. So, it's one problem traded for another, the way I see it. But
Do you want to comment, Mr. Bowman?
I think that's very perceptive. Yeah.
Thanks, Mr. D'Amato. Let me ask,
thank you.
Tim Szynski, the town planner, wrote an email to me earlier in the evening indicating that he was going to be a little late for this meeting. So it's good to hear that Tim is now available. Mr. Szynski, do you want to be heard and have any comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted, I don't have too many comments. I did want to harken back just to something that Mr. Mahalchek had commented about earlier, just for kind of public information purposes. This project itself, I think, has a role to play in mitigating its impacts from a traffic perspective via encouraging and kind of making it easy for its own residents to ride bikes, either to work or to recreational or kind of business opportunities. I just wanted to make sure everyone knew, because it's kind of, we've had a little bit of a soft rollout so far at a staff level, but the town has engaged with the Metropolitan Area Planning Council on a bicycle and pedestrian master plan process. like I said, we've started working with MAPC about that on a staff level. There'll be a public rollout of that in the coming weeks and months. But the goal of that plan is to really identify kind of what our bicycle network looks like today from a connectivity and a safety and an efficiency standpoint, and really try to identify some of the gaps in that network and how we can fill them and kind of make them, safer from, moving from people riding in the street to people riding into bike lanes to potentially creating, protected, separated bicycle facilities that take cyclists out of traffic, which I think is kind of, universally accepted as the kind of the safest way to get people traveling via bicycle. So I just want to let folks know that that is going on. That process will be looking at East Milton as a whole and the square in general. The improvements, via the East Milton Deck project, specifically as they relate to bicycle infrastructure, are going to be an important component of our planning going forward. And I think, making those connections into Quincy via Adam Street to get to the red line over there, and on Granite Ave, as Mr. Pahalchek kind of mentioned, I ride my bike to work every day. I did it when I lived in Neponset Circle. I do it. I live near Franklin Park today. I know all the ways inside of Milton. Some of them are better than others, and I think we need to, the way that you encourage people to ride their bikes is to create safe and efficient, alternatives to driving your car. And so the town has been engaging in that process. It'll be about a year, so just kind of stay tuned for that. And I encourage folks to get involved. We'll probably do a survey. There'll be some public meetings in the fall when school gets in. But one thing I just did want to kind of just insert into the conversation, and I can expand upon these comments at another point, but I don't know, and I'm not here to kind of cheerlead or advocate for the proponent in any way. I don't know if they've professed to have a really dramatic mode share. And by mode share, we kind of mean how many people drive, how many people take a bike, how many people walk. I don't know if they've professed to have a dramatic mode share of transit and bicycle users. But what I will say from a general planning perspective is that every car that you take off the road matters. It's not, traffic congestion is not, it's not a linear increase. If you take one car off the road, it doesn't decrease traffic congestion by, one car. It decreases it by multiple cars. It's exponential. And so that's why we think it's really important to take every one of those marginal vehicles off. And one statistic that I've included in comments on other projects, I actually didn't include them in my comments on this one, which I think was a mistake on my part. But in Norfolk County, according to the census, of all of the rental units in Norfolk County, 72% of those residents of rental housing have one vehicle or no vehicles. And so that includes Brookline and Quincy. That also includes Bellingham and Cohasset and all of the other kind of far-flung Norfolk County communities. So a housing type like apartments that are being proposed here, especially in what is relative to Norfolk County a amenity-rich and transit pretty okay place. It's not unreasonable to assume that there will be some, maybe not significant, but a realistic number of people that will use transit. And we know this just from the census that the types of people that live in these units do not own cars at the same level as folks who live in a 4-bedroom single family house, in a kind of on a single family street. So I think it's important to keep those traffic impacts in mind. I think the traffic peer review, and I think Cliff's review has touched on some of these issues as well. I think just to sort of insert some data into the conversation about what we can reasonably expect from a kind of car ownership and kind of transit usage perspective. But I can expand on those points at a later time. But I really wanted to make sure people knew about the bike. So I think I did that. So thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Tim. Let me just ask whether Judy Barrett is, Judy was going to be present on the telephone. I don't know whether Judy is out there in telephone land.
I do not think so. However, we do have another attendee with a question.
Well, we've kind of ended our questions with the
Okay.
attendees. We'll be going till midnight if we keep it up. One more attendee. Who is it? We'll take the questions. I'm sorry, who's here?
Karen Har- Yep, yep. Karen Harris.
Thank you, Karen Harris. Miss Harris, are you there? Bev, I don't have.
No, well, she has her hand up. Okay,
Okay, so look, and we don't have Judy present.
no, we do not.
Okay, so let me thank everyone for participating tonight. It was an interesting hearing on both sides of the street. Let me ask my fellow board members. We have a on the issue of scheduling, which remains outstanding. Today's the 3rd, and the applicant is suggesting that the 17th, which is our June 17th, which is our next scheduled hearing, which is supposed to be the applicant's response to peer reviews, is too close. And that the applicant needs additional time to do the interplay with the peer reviewers, the site civil people, the Cliff Bomer, and on the traffic side of the street, in order to put together comprehensive comments and perhaps adjustments to the plans. The next available date on the schedule that I have is June 24th. And I have a question. Bev, has that been assigned to the Ice House people, the June 24th hearing?
I don't know, John. I have that at work.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask Judy Barrett. I don't know whether it has or it hasn't. And my perception is, after talking with the applicant and the Ice House application,
The schedule.
is they're working very closely with their planners, but that they're not making quite the progress that they have expected to make. And I wonder, my question for my board members, does it make sense to continue this East Milton project to the 24th and have a comprehensive review of the design peer review and the changes, and to bump the Ice House back, I'll say 1 week, but 1 week is going to take you close to the 4th of July holiday, but sometime shortly after the 4th of July holiday, the Thursday. Bev, what, I don't have a calendar in front of me. When is July 3rd or 4th? What day of the week?
Saturday.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Okay, so that's and so the Thursday before that would be, is that the 5th or the 6th? I'm sorry, the
First.
It's the 1st.
Okay. Does it make sense to bump the Ice House to July 1st and to reschedule this particular hearing for June 24th?
That is a big vacation week. I don't know.
I'm sorry, what's vacation week?
July 4th week is usually vacation week, but so the 24th was tentatively scheduled for the Ice House. Yes, the 10th and the 24th.
Have you heard from them whether they'll be?
No, I have not. So I think that's very fluid, the 24th.
Jeff, do you want to be heard on rescheduling this hearing?
No.
Okay.
I don't know. Is there a
Do you want to pick it? What date?
I don't care, John. I don't know anything about the Ice House, so I don't not following that one. I could make it on the 24th if that's the question.
Okay, that's the question. Nick Gray, do you want to be heard?
I'd be available on the 24th or on the hearing date as originally scheduled, either one.
Okay.
The 17th, both dates are fine.
Great. Let me just briefly hear from Peter Freeman and Bob Galvin, does everyone agree that it's appropriate to continue this hearing to June 24th to allow the applicant to have a more comprehensive response to the peer reviews? Mr. Freeman, what do you say?
It's fine with me. If Jen, if that's okay with you, it would be either Eileen or me. I right now have another hearing, but I think that's okay. So seems to make sense to us, right, Jen?
Is that
Thank
okay?
you.
Is that okay with
Certainly.
you?
Thank you.
And it's okay with me. This is Bob Galvin. I just would want to note, though, if the new legislation doesn't pass, when you're scheduling your meeting, you may want to schedule it in person because that's what you'll be stuck with. Or you'll be stuck with the regular rules, which require a majority to be in person and then a majority of your board. It's created a bunch of problems in a bunch of locations, and I think Peter Freeman's experience is probably similar to mine. I have a hearing coming up in another town on the 16th of June, and we're not sure whether we can go forward because it's scheduled remotely, but if the legislation doesn't pass, the last day you can do a remote hearing is the 15th of June. So, but the date is okay with us.
Ms. Corcoran, is the 24th okay with you?
I think the 24th is excellent. I think that gives us enough time to really give you a lot of bang for your buck at that meeting. So thank you.
Okay, that's great. Jeffrey Mullen and Nick Gray, all in agreement to continue this to the 24th at 7 o'clock?
Yes.
East Milton
Yeah.
application. Okay, that's,
Yes, yes.
we'll do that, and then we'll be in touch with the Ice House folk and see when their project is best able to be heard. So, Jeffrey, do you have anything else you want to add or say? Or
No, John, thank you. No, I'm good. Thanks.
right, Nick, you all
Mr. Chairman, just a question for, I think, everybody's edification.
Please.
So, and that date is great and it makes sense, but would we be doing multiple things? And would you anticipate having all three of your consultants, traffic, civil, and of course, Mr. Bomer?
Well, that's an interesting question. My thought would be, but I'll freely admit that Peter Freeman has no more knowledge about the scheduling of hearings and the participation in hearings than I do. My guess is if we're going to address the engineering issues and we're going to address the site civil issues and we're going to address the traffic issues, those would all be the applicant's witnesses or presentations, and presumably as part of each presentation, the applicant engineer or the expert would indicate where the project developer or the applicant's technical expert differs from Mr. Bomer and what those issues are, and whether they can be bridged or whether they just have to be decided by the commission, by the Board of Appeals. My guess is if I certainly would invite Mr. Bomer to be present, but then I have to invite our site civil engineer and then Jeffrey Burke would have to be there. And I'm not sure we can, I think it would be a very confusing hearing, and I'm not sure that everyone could be heard in a convenient and coherent way. What do you think of that?
I mean, I raised it really for that brief discussion. I know it's getting late, but Jen also, want to be sure, that you have thought about it as you have been all night, and what your thought is, or how, again, the date is great. We'll accomplish a lot, whatever we do, but I just want to have everybody on the same page as to what we should try to do that night, in addition to more discussion on architecture.
Yeah, I mean, I think each of the applicant's expert witnesses should be prepared to testify that they met with their cohort, the expert on the other side. Let me just use simple language, and that they met. And here's what we agreed upon. Here are the modifications we're suggesting to the project. Maybe you have to take time to prepare plans or other documents. And here are the substantive areas where we have fundamental disagreement, and then we can focus on those. And it may not be at the 24th; it may be at a later hearing. But
Okay, I thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think, Jen, that's what you're aiming for, correct?
Yes, what I was contemplating was essentially, almost similar to our second hearing where we gave the in-depth presentation about each of the aspects of the project. And so it would be kind of, a response. We'll also be submitting written responses, of course, in the meantime. So those will be able to be, reviewed previously. I know that each of our professionals are going back and forth with their counterpart. So, I think that there's going to be a lot of work done in the meantime, and then it's going to be a pretty, concise presentation that's really focused on the major issues at that meeting.
Okay, I agree, and I concur with your philosophy and policy as to how the parties should be interacting, hopefully for the benefit of everyone, including the East Milton neighbors. So unless anyone has something further, we're going to continue this hearing until June 24th at 7 p.m. And I want to thank everybody for participating in a very coherent and productive manner tonight. So
thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Enjoy the summer heat that's coming up, and see you on the 24th. In the meantime, if anyone has any issues, feel free to talk with Judy Barrett, and she'll help to coordinate any issues if they occur before we open the hearing on the 24th. So
very good. Thank you very much.
Okay, we're adjourned.
Thanks. So long, everybody.
Bye-bye.